My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, Christmas had been the one time when my family seemed completely ordinary. We had our traditions and arguments, and somehow, by Christmas morning, everything felt forgiven. My parents, Linda and Robert, lived about 40 minutes from me in the suburb where I grew up. I was their oldest daughter, and even though my younger sister, Megan, lived closer, I had never felt like an outsider. Mom called when she needed a recipe. Dad sent me ridiculous Christmas memes. And every December, Mom made the same request. Bring dessert. Something you actually like. So, on the afternoon before our family Christmas, I drove to the grocery store with a short list. I had already bought my parents a new coffee maker because Dad's old one sounded like a lawnmower. I had wrapped Mom's gift myself. I was standing in the bakery section when I called her. I trusted them completely. Mom, quick question. Should I bring the chocolate cake or the apple pie? She didn't answer. At first, I thought the call had dropped. I checked my screen. She was still there. Mom, there was another long silence. Then she said quietly, "Oh, we did Christmas yesterday." I laughed. Very funny.
What are you talking about?
She didn't laugh. My smile disappeared. What? Before she could answer, I heard Dad in the background. Then he took the phone. "Emily," he said, "we already had everyone over." Everyone. I felt my stomach tighten. Everyone who? Dad sighed. Family. I stood there between shelves of cakes and pies, suddenly aware of how loud the store was. "But you never told me." Another pause. Then Dad said the sentence I would remember for years. "Honestly, everything was easier without you there." I didn't know what to say then. Not even a little. I just stared at the chocolate cake in my hand. A few seconds later, I quietly ended the call. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if my family had been pretending I belonged long before I realized I had been left out. I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes before starting the engine. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Mom had mixed up the dates. Maybe Dad had meant a small dinner, not Christmas. But none of those explanations answered one question. Why hadn't anyone called me? I checked my phone again. No missed calls. No text from Mom. Nothing from Dad. Nothing from Megan. I opened our family group chat and scrolled through the messages from the previous week. Mom had written, "Everything is ready." Megan replied with a heart. I had never seen that conversation before. I checked the group details. My name was gone. My hands went cold. Someone had removed me. I called Mom again. She answered after 3 rings. "Emily, what is it? What happened to the family group chat?" Silence. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I was removed from my own family chat. It was just for Christmas planning. Then why wasn't I invited to Christmas?
She sighed.
"We thought you needed some space." Who is we? She didn't answer. "Mom, what did I do?" Another pause. Then she said, "You know exactly what you did." I laughed, but there was no humor in it.
No, Mom.
I honestly don't. She ended the call. That evening, I called Megan. She answered immediately. "Why didn't anyone tell me about Christmas?" A long pause. "Mom said you knew." "Knew what?" "She said you didn't want to come." My chest tightened. "I never said that." "I know." The words came out so quietly I almost missed them. "You know? I don't know everything." "Then tell me what you do know." She exhaled. "Emily, everyone thought you were angry with the family." "Why?" "Because of Thanksgiving." I frowned. Thanksgiving had been completely normal. Then Megan said something that made my stomach drop. "Mom told everyone you said you were done helping Dad and that you thought the family was holding you back." I stared through my windshield. I had never said anything like that. Not once. And suddenly, the Christmas dinner I had missed didn't feel like the real betrayal. The real betrayal was realizing someone had been rewriting my words when I wasn't there to defend them. Megan's words kept replaying in my head. "Mom told everyone you said you were done helping Dad." But I had never said that. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, I had driven Dad to his doctor's appointment because Mom was working. Dad had complained about needing another surgery, and I told him, "Whatever you need, I'll help." So, Why would Mom tell everyone the opposite? The next morning, I called Megan again. I need you to be honest with me. She hesitated. Emily, I probably shouldn't be telling you this. That hasn't stopped anyone else from talking about me. She went quiet. Then she said, it was Claire. Claire was our cousin. I had never considered her someone who would deliberately turn my parents against me. What did she say? Megan took a breath. She told Mom you were angry because Dad changed his will. I froze. What? She said you found out you weren't getting what you expected and that you were planning to distance yourself from everyone. That's completely false. I know. Then why did Mom believe her? I don't know. I did. Mom trusted Claire because Claire had been around constantly after Dad's surgery. She brought meals, picked up prescriptions, and spent hours at their house. I had been working long hours and helping whenever I could, but Claire had been there physically. That gave her something I didn't have. Access. I asked Megan to send me every message Claire had sent about me. Within minutes, my phone filled with screenshots. Claire had taken harmless conversations and twisted them completely. A text where I said, Dad shouldn't have to worry about money right now, became, Emily thinks Dad is wasting money. Another message where I complained about being exhausted became, Emily says this family is a burden. Then I found the one that changed everything. Claire had written to Mom, I think Emily is trying to separate Dad from everyone so she can control his finances. That was the lie. That was why they had pushed me away. I didn't call Claire. Not yet. I wanted to understand how deep the lie had gone before confronting her. I needed the whole truth first. Instead, I called Mom. Mom, I said calmly, I know what Claire told you. Silence. Then I heard her whisper, how? Because I have the messages. Finally, Mom asked, Emily, why didn't you ever tell us this? My throat tightened. Because I thought you would believe me without needing proof. The next afternoon, Mom asked me to come over. I almost said no. When I arrived, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table. Mom stood beside the counter, holding her phone. Claire was already there. She looked at me and said, Emily, this has all gotten blown out of proportion.
No.
It got blown out of proportion when you started telling people things I never said. Claire looked at Mom. I was only trying to protect you. From what? I asked. She didn't answer. I opened my phone and placed the screenshots on the table. This is what I actually said. Mom read them one by one. Dad leaned closer. The room became silent. Then Mom looked at Claire. You told me, she said she didn't want to help us. Claire swallowed. She was upset.
That isn't what I asked, Mom said.
Claire finally admitted she had exaggerated conversations because she thought Emily was becoming distant and wanted the family to stop depending on her. You didn't misunderstand me, I said. You created a version of me that didn't exist. Claire started crying. I didn't think it would go this far. But it did. Dad lowered his eyes. Then he spoke. Emily, what I said on the phone was wrong. I didn't answer. I thought you were angry with us. I thought you didn't want to be part of this family anymore. You never asked me. I know. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We should have asked. Mom reached across the table. Can you forgive us? I looked at her hand but didn't take it immediately. I can forgive you for believing something you were told, I said. But I can't pretend this didn't happen. Dad nodded. What do you need from us?
Truth.
From now on, if you hear something about me, ask me. Don't assume. Mom nodded. We promise. I finally took her hand. It wasn't a perfect reunion. Nothing magically went back to normal that afternoon. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't fighting to prove that I belonged. I was simply being heard. Dad looked at Mom, then back at me, and his expression told me whatever came next would change everything forever too. Then Dad quietly said, There's something else you need to know. I looked at him. And suddenly, I realized Christmas wasn't the only thing my family had kept from me. Dad looked at Mom before continuing. Before everything happened, we had planned something for you. I frowned. What? Mom wiped her eyes. We were going to give you the old family cabin. I stared at her. The cabin had belonged to my grandparents. It wasn't luxurious, but it was where every childhood Christmas had happened. Dad had recently mentioned repairing the roof, but I never imagined they were considering giving it to me. Why? Dad smiled sadly. Because you were always the one who kept everyone connected. That sentence hurt more than I expected. For weeks, I had believed my family saw me as a problem. Now I realized they had once seen me as the opposite. Mom explained that Claire had convinced them I didn't want anything to do with the family anymore. Because of that, they had postponed the paperwork. I looked at Claire. She didn't say anything. There was nothing left to defend. I didn't accept the cabin that day. Instead, I told my parents I needed time. I also told them something else. I love you, but things have to change. They agreed. Over the next few months, Mom called more often. Dad started checking with me directly whenever he heard something. Claire eventually apologized, and while I accepted her apology, I kept my distance. Trust wasn't restored because everyone cried around a kitchen table. It was restored slowly through actions. Then Christmas came again. This time, Mom called me weeks before the holiday. "What dessert are you bringing?" I laughed. "Chocolate cake." "Good," she said. "Your father already asked for it." When I arrived at their house, the Christmas lights were glowing. Dad was arguing with the television, and Mom was standing in the kitchen waiting for me. She hugged me tightly. For a second, I closed my eyes. The previous Christmas had made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere. This Christmas reminded me that belonging isn't something you should have to beg for. I placed the cake on the table. Dad cut the first slice. Mom smiled and said, "I'm glad you're here." And this time, I didn't wonder whether she meant it, because I had learned something important. Family isn't just about sharing a last name or sitting around the same table. It's about believing each other enough to ask questions before believing rumors. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do isn't walk away forever. Sometimes, it's stay, but only after you make it clear that your love deserves honesty, too. That Christmas wasn't perfect, but it was real. And after everything that happened, real was more than enough.